Greetings, dear viewers. This is the Cross Moda channel. What comes to your mind? If we mention a motorcycle brand like Dampf-Kraft-Wagen, we can immediately recall that the NZ 350 model served as a prototype for the domestic IZH 350, and the lighter RT 125 was not copied in the second half of the 1940s, except maybe the lazy ones. What was it about Dampf-Kraft-Wagen motorcycles that made them so wildly popular in the first place? How did a small German company become the world leader in the number of two-wheeled vehicles produced by the end of the 1920s? And why did this production eventually wither away and fade into oblivion? In this video, we'll explore the history of German Dampf-Kraft-Wagen motorcycles. Enjoy watching. The history of this company began back in 1904 when the Dane Jürgen Skafte Rasmussen and his partner Carl Ernst founded the company Rasmussen and Ernst in the city of Chemnitz to sell various equipment and machinery. In 1906, 2 years later, Rasmussen bought an industrial facility in Schopau and relocated production there. In 1913, the two businessmen had a disagreement and the company was legally split. On this occasion, Ernst Jürgen Rasmussen named his company Schopauer Maschinenfabrik Rasmussen. With the outbreak of World War I, the enterprising Dane received government contracts to produce fuses and detonators in addition to his main business. This brought in a solid profit and allowed Rasmussen to expand production by 1915, employing nearly 500 workers. In 1916, Jürgen became so passionate about making steam cars that several working prototypes were built in the factory, and for this purpose a new trademark, Dampf-Kraft-Wagen, was specially registered. It's an abbreviation for Dampf-Kraft-Wagen, which literally translates as steam car. However, for reasons that are not exactly known, the steam car project was not successful, and it never reached mass production. Rasmussen was fascinated by a new idea proposed by a talented engineer, Hugo Ruppe, who had joined his company shortly before the end of World War I. He suggested mass-producing small two-stroke engines to be installed on bicycles. In 1919, at the Leipzig Fair, the first Dampf-Kraft-Wagen auxiliary bicycle engine debuted, featuring a 118cc displacement and 1 horsepower. This power unit, with a horizontal cylinder, was mounted on the bicycle's luggage rack, and its torque was transmitted to the rear wheel by a belt. Above the engine was a 2-liter fuel tank. The unit weighed 14 kilograms and could accelerate the bicycle up to 40 kilometers per hour. This device turned out to be in demand in post-war Germany, and by 1922, more than 20,000 of these engines had already been produced and sold. The great popularity of these little engines among the people led to an alternative interpretation of the Dampf-Kraft-Wagen abbreviation, Das kleine Wunder, or the Little Miracle. These engines were also nicknamed the Boy's Dream. Between 1921 and 1922, Dampf-Kraft-Wagen, together with the Eichler Company, began producing a scooter called 1 horsepower and later increased to 1.5. Pay attention to the driver's seat. Everything was done for comfort. About 500 golems were produced over 2 years. Starting in 1922, a more advanced version of the scooter called Lomus was produced at these same 2 factories. Even 100 years ago, this machine had a number of features characteristic of modern scooters: an engine under the seat, wide footrests that transition into front shields, a wide gap between the seat and the front wheel fork, and so on. That same year, the German company unveiled its first real motorcycle, the RM model. The model was equipped with a 150cc two-stroke engine, producing 2.25 horsepower. A distinctive feature of the RM and Lomas engines was the forced air cooling system with a fan and a characteristic shroud. These engines were not only installed on products from Dampf-Kraft-Wagen and Eichler, but were also sold to many other motorcycle manufacturers of that era. RM and Lomas remained in production until 1925 inclusive. The RM model, which was originally a bicycle with a small engine and a belt drive to the rear wheel, was already further developed by 1923. The ZL model motorcycle received a new frame and an elongated fuel tank, and a year later, an entirely new product appeared, the ZM model. This lightweight motorcycle was equipped with engines of 5 different displacements, ranging from 128 to 206 cc, but most importantly, the engine unit featured a 2-speed gearbox with a kickstarter. Shoe and band brakes gradually gave way to drum brake hubs on both wheels. It is worth noting that since the early 1920s, Dampf-Kraft-Wagen motorcycles participated in many competitions, performing quite well and thus gaining popularity. And since fans of the brand often wanted to buy exactly the kind of machine that competed in races, Dampf-Kraft-Wagen specifically offered them sports versions, which were somewhat more powerful and featured different equipment. Almost simultaneously with the ZM model, another model appeared, the SM Stahlmodul, with the same choice of engines, but a completely new chassis and stamped steel construction. In the period of 1925-1926, 3-wheeled delivery trucks developed by Dampf-Kraft-Wagen in collaboration with Eichler, based on the Lomas scooter, entered the German market. Instead of a front fork, a 2-wheeled cart with an enclosed container was attached to the scooter. The load capacity of such a cart was 250 kg, and the most powerful 206 cc engine available at that time was used as the power unit. Many companies started making similar models under a Dampf-Kraft-Wagen license. A close partnership began with Frama, which soon, along with Dampf-Kraft-Wagen, started making more advanced and powerful 3-wheeled trucks. A 300cc 7-horsepower engine was used. Since 1925, identical E200 and E206 models were mass-produced, with the new Dampf-Kraft-Wagen versions reaching speeds up to 70 km per hour. It was on such motorcycles that 2 factory racers, Hans Sprung and Emil Brius, arrived in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics to participate in the first all-Union automobile and motorcycle endurance run of 1925 along the Moscow-Kharkov-Moscow route. Since January 1927, all E200 and E206 motorcycles use a chain drive for the rear wheel instead of a belt drive. During 1926-1927, the Dampf-Kraft-Wagen company became involved in a lengthy legal process, as a cable factory from Berlin, Deutsche Kabelwerke, claimed the same abbreviation. During the litigation, similar abbreviations, Das Große Wunder and DRW, were used for the motorcycles, with the R representing Rasmussen's company. Das Große Wunder was often seen as Das Große Wunder, or the Great Miracle. By the end of 1927, the abbreviation Dampf-Kraft-Wagen was finally legalized as the trademark of the motorcycle company from Zschopau. Do you know why Dampf-Kraft-Wagen stuck to 200cc engines for so long? In Germany, motorcycles up to 200cc didn't require a license or state taxes. These machines were mass-produced and sold well, but Dampf-Kraft-Wagen never intended to make small displacement bikes permanently. Moreover, German society had somewhat recovered from the war and hyperinflation, and was ready for more substantial machines. There were these British motorcycles called Scott, which performed very well in races under the slogan 2 strokes, 2 cylinders. It was these motorcycles that inspired the Dampf-Kraft-Wagen engineers led by Hermann Weber. When creating the new model, on September 25, 1926, the first Z500 was completed, featuring a 2-cylinder 2-stroke 12-horsepower engine. The engine lubrication was combined. The fuel tank had two compartments, 12 liters for fuel lubrication and 2 liters of oil for the oil pump. The motorcycle could reach a speed of up to 100 km per hour. Other changes on this machine included a parallelogram front fork with a single central spring, chain drive to the rear wheel, and most importantly, a 3-speed gearbox located in a separate unit. The Z500 model immediately attracted public attention, and not only in Germany, strong demand made it possible to increase export sales. But while there were no complaints about the motorcycles in flat areas, troubling reports began to come in from Italy, with its mountain roads and high summer air temperatures, about regular piston seizures due to overheating. This fact prompted the engineers to urgently prepare a modernized version. The 1928 ZSV 500 model, with its 2-cylinder 14-horsepower water-cooled engine, was free of the shortcomings of its predecessor. Much more comfortable temperature conditions for the engine's operation and processing. The redesigned crankshaft allowed for the elimination of the pressurized lubrication system, which significantly simplified the already complex engine. In 1927, the E250 model appeared, featuring a 2-stroke engine with 3-channel scavenging. The chassis was similar to the previously created 2-cylinder model, and a year later, the E300 version appeared. In 1928, the Dampf-Kraft-Wagen concern became the largest motorcycle manufacturer in the world, thanks to the simplicity and reliability of its products and the intuition of the company's management, who were quick to respond to consumer demands. Early 1929 marked a milestone period for Dampf-Kraft-Wagen motorcycles. First, at the Berlin and London shows, a new version of the Dampf-Kraft-Wagen Supersport 500 motorcycle was presented, also known as the ZBW 500, featuring a 2-cylinder 18-horsepower liquid-cooled engine combined with a 3-speed gearbox. A little later, customers were offered the Luxus series of motorcycles with air-cooled engines with a displacement of 200-300 cc and 500 cc. These motorcycles received an entirely new frame made of stamped elements assembled on long studs, and the front fork also featured stamped legs. The 200 and 300 cc engines were still developments of the old line of power units, while the 500 cc engine was an evolution of a new generation that began with a similar water-cooled unit. One of these models, the Luxus 300, became the prototype for the first mass-produced Soviet motorcycle. The L300, meanwhile, production of simpler, cheaper, lightweight motorcycles from the previous generation continued. In 1930, Jörgen Rasmussen acquired the Schutoff motorcycle company from Chemnitz, and some of the 2-stroke Dampf-Kraft-Wagen models were offered to customers under the new brand. In addition, the Dampf-Kraft-Wagen lineup was expanded somewhat with motorcycles featuring 200cc and 500cc 4-stroke engines. Since the Schutoff company originally specialized in exactly these types of engines, sales of Dampf-Kraft-Wagen Schutoff motorcycles continued until 1932. Afterward, the Chemnitz plant was repurposed to make electrical equipment for the entire Dampf-Kraft-Wagen lineup. Continue? However, not everything went as smoothly as it might seem. The global financial crisis that broke out in 1929 did not spare the company. Dampf-Kraft-Wagen found itself in a difficult financial situation, and a number of companies were saved from collapse by merging. These were Dampf-Kraft-Wagen Audi, Horch, and Wanderer. This quartet united to form the organization Auto Union AG. Dampf-Kraft-Wagen kept their brand, but now the logo featured the 4 rings that everyone knows. Dampf-Kraft-Wagen's racing program deserves separate mention. Besides production motorcycles adapted for racing, there were unique racing developments. For instance, in the late 1920s, Hugo Ruppe designed a new racing motorcycle exclusively for Dampf-Kraft-Wagen. In this design, he tested an air supercharger with its cylinder positioned opposite the engine's working cylinder in relation to the crankshaft. There were 2 versions, a 175cc with 12 horsepower and a 250cc with 17 horsepower. Hermann Weber first continued working on the supercharging topic and then focused on mass production. Godov was replaced as chief designer of the racing line by August Prewar. The direct work was carried out by engineer Arnold Soler. It was Soler who came up with the idea to combine the Gorelli scheme of 2 cylinders with a common combustion chamber and the Rupee design with an air blower. To reduce the size of the power unit, Soler positioned the air blower cylinder horizontally. Each engine piston had its own connecting rod, which were hinged together and drove the single main journal of the crankshaft. Moreover, Soler installed a reed valve on the intake. The power of such a water-cooled engine, which naturally ran on a special fuel mixture, reached 24 horsepower by 1937 with a displacement of 250 cubic centimeters. Then, more powerful 500 and 600 cc Soler engines appeared, which were equipped with a cylindrical rotary valve in the intake tract. The next step was replacing the piston air blower with a centrifugal one, and finally in the second half of the 1930s, a 4-liter engine with 2 combustion chambers and a centrifugal air blower was created. In addition, various experimental designs of racing motorcycles were built on Dampf-Kraft-Wagen supercharged motorcycles. Many victories were achieved, the most notable of which was the 1938 Tourist Trophy race in the 250cc class, won by Ewald Klug. In the late 1930s, motorsport involving Germans became highly politicized. Subtitles by Dimitrorzak. In international motorcycle races, it was stressed that Nazi Germany had the best motorcycles and racers. Such a willful opposition definitely did not please other countries and organizations, particularly the very organizers of the Tourist Trophy on the Isle of Man. On the other hand, the motorcycles were excellent, and among all the racers, Dampf-Kraft-Wagen had a truly unique machine. Back in 1935, German engineers tested an engine with opposed pistons. It was a 2-stroke, and even had supercharging. This unit was expected to be efficient, but the company didn't implement the project before World War II began. After the war, the Chopau plant became part of the Soviet occupation zone under Soviet administration in 1949. 5 units were built, one 250 with 45 horsepower and 4 350s with 60. Pay attention. On the 350, the engine was mounted longitudinally in the frame and the equipment was sent to Serpukhov and used successfully. I will try to tell you more about this machine in a separate segment. And now let's go back a bit on the timeline. Already in the early 1930s, racing technologies slowly began to make their way into civilian products. The Dampf-Kraft-Wagen rotary valve was used on the Dampf-Kraft-Wagen Sport 350 road motorcycle from 1933. But there was another technology that allowed the German company to remain a leader in the 1930s. Back in 1924, Adolf Schnürle patented the technology of reverse scavenging for the 2-stroke engine cylinder. The management and engineers at Dampf-Kraft-Wagen could not ignore this technology, and in 1932, the company bought the exclusive rights to Schnürle's development. The loop scavenging technology made it possible to reduce the high fuel consumption of 2-stroke engines. With this technology, fuel consumption dropped by 40% and approached the level of 4-stroke engines of similar displacement. For those years, this was progress. And thanks to the exclusive rights, Dampf-Kraft-Wagen sold licenses to third-party companies, making money from it. By 1932, the Dampf-Kraft-Wagen motorcycle line was established, with engine blocks, gear-driven transmissions, stamped detachable frames, and many models featuring chrome-plated fuel tank panels. Back then, the Block 175 was the lightest model, and the Block 500 was the heaviest. Supersport 500 and 600, the popular liquid-cooled engine models, were dropped from the lineup a year earlier. In 1933, Dampf-Kraft-Wagen motorcycles tested the Geno starter for the first time, modeled after the one used in Dampf-Kraft-Wagen car engines. The idea was simple. Any direct current generator is essentially an electric motor. If you install sufficiently powerful windings and supply power from the battery, it is quite capable of turning the crankshaft of a motorcycle engine. With the arrival of the new SB family, Geno starters were transferred to the 200cc and 500cc motorcycles, of the Luxus model range. In 1934, the Dampf-Kraft-Wagen Group's motorcycle program consisted of the KM 200 and SB 200 models, which differed slightly in cylinder and fuel tank sizes, the SB 350 and SB 500, and the new addition that year was the lightweight RT 100. The RT 100 turned out to be such a popular lightweight motorcycle model that by the start of World War II, as many as 72,000 units had been produced. With the introduction of the NZ family of motorcycles, models with a Dyna starter were discontinued since the special electrical equipment significantly increased the cost of the motorcycles. The new NZ 250 and NZ 350 models were vastly different from earlier Dampf-Kraft-Wagen motorcycles. Firstly, the redesigned engine received a chain drive under an aluminum crankcase cover. Secondly, the gearbox became 4-speed, and in addition to the hand shifter, a foot-operated gear shifting mechanism was also introduced. By the way, the NZ 500 version appeared a year later and differed not only by its upgraded chassis and power unit, but also by the introduction of a spring rear suspension, which could be adjusted for stiffness, depending on whether the motorcycle was used with a sidecar or as a solo version. The last pre-war innovation from Dampf-Kraft-Wagen was the brilliant creation of Hermann Weber, the lightweight motorcycle Dampf-Kraft-Wagen RT 125, which featured a number of unconventional solutions for its class. For example, the cylinder and head attached to the crankcase with anchor studs instead of long bolts, and the smaller generator was hidden under a streamlined cover. The decorative gear shifting mechanism was only foot-operated, and after a long break, the frame became tubular and welded again. The motorcycle was so successful overall that it was copied everywhere after the war. In the Soviet Union, Pervy Kovrovets, Moskva M1A, Britain, Birmingham Small Arms, Japan, Yamaha, United States of America, Harley-Davidson, Hammer, Poland, Wytwórnia Sprzętu Komunikacyjnego, Suchedniowska, Huta Ludwików, etc. After World War II began, the RT 125 and NZ 350 became key Wehrmacht motorcycles, produced until 1944. At the war's end, the NZ 350 engine block was made from cast iron because aluminum was scarce. After the end of the war, the factories of the Dampf-Kraft-Wagen concern ended up on different sides of the front line. Most of the plant in Chopau was dismantled and taken to the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, and the IFAW-IFA company was established on the remaining base. In 1950, they resumed making the lightweight RT 125. The brand was IFA Dampf-Kraft-Wagen, but from October 1, 1951, a German Democratic Republic government directive banned using the Dampf-Kraft-Wagen abbreviation in the name. From 1953 to 1956, IFA produced an interesting two-stroke opposed model, the IFA BK 350. In 1956, the company was renamed MZET, and that's a completely different story. As for the factory in Ingolstadt, it resumed production of the 125 CCRT model in 1949. Since 1951, the RT 200 model with a telescopic front fork was added, and a little later the RT 250 version appeared. Since 1952, both motorcycles received a plunger rear suspension, and in the winter of 1953-1954, the front fork was redesigned. The RT 175 model entered production in 1954. Before the early 1950s, Germans were banned from world-class motorcycle competitions. However, the situation changed, and by 1951, Dampf-Kraft-Wagen's racing program resumed. At first, the races featured modernized pre-war motorcycles, but in May 1952, the factory team rolled out something new on the racetrack. The RM 350 model, created by Erich Wolf, had an engine that was a 3-cylinder V-type with a cylinder angle of 75 degrees. Initially, the potential of this machine was around 40 horsepower, and a bit later the power increased to 45 with a top speed of about 230 km per hour. In addition to this model, A large number of versions for various off-road competitions were created based on production motorcycles, and gradually lighter equipment began to replace the motorcycles. The Dampf-Kraft-Wagen company produced various 50cc mopeds that did not stand out among similar models from other manufacturers. The hobby scooter was much more interesting. 75cc 3 horsepower, and instead of a gearbox, it was equipped with a V-belt variator. This model enjoyed steady demand and was produced until 1957. The last production motorcycle from Dampf-Kraft-Wagen was the two-cylinder version, Dampf-Kraft-Wagen RT 350S, which was produced starting in 1955. The machine was equipped with a swing-arm rear suspension and enlarged aluminum brake drums, with the rear brake operated hydraulically. But this progressive and interesting model could no longer change the crisis situation in the market, as demand for motorcycles was rapidly declining. And to avoid a complete disaster, the Dampf-Kraft-Wagen company merged with Victorian Express in 1958. The new association, called Zweirad Union, kept the trademarks of the companies that joined it, but their independent history ended there. The automotive history of Dampf-Kraft-Wagen is also interesting. Dampf-Kraft-Wagen was originally founded as an automobile manufacturer. Well, do you remember Dampf-Kraft-Wagen? However, at that time, the steam engine business was not successful, and the company, having succeeded in building motorcycles, would return to the topic of automobiles in 1928 and would produce them with varying degrees of success all the way until '66. These small cars had two-stroke engines, mostly inline twins of 600 or 700 cc, with rarer models featuring V4 engines of 1000 or 1100 cc. In 1939, a 900 cc three-cylinder engine producing 30 horsepower was developed, but cars using it wouldn't be produced until after the war. It is worth noting that in 1931, Dampf-Kraft-Wagen were pioneers in the use of front-wheel drive in cars. A number of models of this brand had glued wooden bodies, both in the mid-1930s and after World War II. This was due to shortages. It was precisely thanks to the wooden body that Dampf-Kraft-Wagen managed to master mass production of these little cars in the post-war years. In this 1934 promotional photo, the strength of the glued wooden body is clearly demonstrated. This fact, by the way, gave rise to another interpretation of Dampf-Kraft-Wagen in the Soviet Union: wood, glue, water. That's the story of German company Dampf-Kraft-Wagen. And with that, my story ends. Friends, as always, this was the CrossMoto channel. Thank you very much for taking the time to check out this material, and also for your activity in the form of likes, reposts, and subscriptions. Special thanks to everyone who supports the channel financially using the details pinned in the description. See you next time.